So giving a lecture to a mixed audience is not so easy because we're a mixture of Master Masons, Fellow Crafts, and Entered Apprentice. But what I will say is every Entered Apprentice should be aware of what I'm going to talk about. So there's nothing going to be embarrassing. I would like to introduce to you two concepts. First, the hard function of Freemasonry, which is the lodge, and the soft function, which is the ritual. As you know, I've been asked to write a book about alchemy and Freemasonry, and I've nearly completed it. And part of the lecture this evening is part of that book. So it's fresh in my mind, so I thought I would choose this subject. But if you remember nothing about this short talk, the only thing I'd like you to remember is that Freemasonry is the ritual that we use is actually a puzzle. And it was made by the first three Grand Masters between the years of 1717 to about 1725 to be a puzzle. And it's like Churchill said about Russia. He said that Russia was a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. This is exactly the same as Freemasonry. And it was written for people who had an eye to see and an ear to hear. These kind of secret teachings. In those days, the education system was slightly different from ours, and they would have caught on very quickly to some of the hints that we don't see, that we actually kind of gloss over. And the reason I know this is because in the ritual, there are certain signposts. And just like Freemasonry has landmarks, the ritual has these signposts, which is one of the important things is that you should never change these. So updating the language to make it more modern actually hides some of these signposts. Also, translating it into another language also hides the signposts, because the Freemasonry wasn't intended to be done in Japanese. The original Freemasons, they only thought of the Greater London area, what they call the Greater Metropolitan area. So any changes to the language, even though the language may be difficult, actually is a disservice. And I also have a concern about this pin, which I have here. You can see it. It's the new Grand Lodge of England's logo for Freemasonry, where the square and compasses have actually been separated. This actually changes some of the esoteric teachings. They have a meaning. That's why they were crossed in the first place. If they were separated, they would have done that in the first place. I've found so far 22 of these signposts, and I'm not going to talk about them, but I will show you how to find them. And the way to find them is based on a concept called Steganography. Now, you may not be familiar with Steganography. It's not such a common word, but it's a form of cryptography. Cryptography now is used in computers, ATMs, banks. In the past, people used like word replacement or letter replacement or masks to hide secret messages which they were sending around the country. Steganography is different from cryptography insofar as the medium actually disguises the fact that there is a code in there in the first place. One way of thinking it is like digital photography. When you see a digital photograph, you only see the image, but inside that is encoded various things. For example, like the date it was taken, where it was taken, and even copyright. But you don't see that, you just see the image. And this is the challenge for this, because we just see the ritual. We don't see behind the ritual. And we see, what I say, the external teachings, but not the internal teachings. And I believe this is one of the reasons that many people leave the craft after a couple of years, because they see it as being very shallow. Oh, I've done the rituals. 10 times. I know it. You know, you don't know it. That's just the beginning. Finding all these clues is the real challenge. But it's rather like pirate's treasure. Pirates hide the treasure, and when the last pirate dies, nobody else knows that there's treasure there to be looked for. And they don't know where to look for it. So, you know, the whole the secret treasure disappears. And so to avoid this, the 3 Grand Masters in 1717, they included a key in the ritual. Now the key, if you weren't aware of it, you would also just gloss over it. And this is one of the challenges. Where am I going? Yes. Is that we don't see the key. We don't see it as a key per se. I studied the Book of Revelation, and I wrote a book about it. And the Book of Revelation also works on steganography, because there's another story underneath the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation was written in the time of the Roman occupation of the Levant, when the authors didn't want the Romans to understand what they were writing. So it's a secret code. If you knew the symbols, then the code opens up. And it's the same in Freemason. That's why they talk about symbolism so much. The term steganography was first used in 1499, so it isn't a new concept at all, by a person called Johannes Trithemius. And he wrote a book about steganography. And in the true spirit of the subject, he hid it inside a book on magic. And it was only like 200 years later that they realized it wasn't a book on magic, but it was a book on writing about codes. In 1641, John Wilkins in England published a similar book, but this time in English. And it was so popular, it was like a bestseller in the 17th century. The words mean, steganos means to cover or to conceal, and ography, which means just writing. So it's a kind of covered text. So you have to have a cover to put the text in. And in Freemasonry, that is a peculiar system of morality which is veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Just understanding that, when I've kind of picked it apart, now I understand exactly what that means. But I think a lot of people, oh, okay, it's, you know. So we've got to look up the symbols. Let's see. If somebody goes to the internet and searches for the secrets of Freemasonry, they're going to get thousands of pages about allegories, symbolisms, and, you know, the obvious things, of course, and conspiracies, of course. But they're only looking at the cover text. And without having the key or understanding that there is a key there in the first place to look for, they will never find these symbolisms, the signposts. So the Grand Masters, the 3 Grand Masters who started the revival, their plan actually worked too well, because so few people understand it, from my understanding it. So about steganography, there are 5 aspects to steganography, and you will find these in the text, in the ritual, if you look carefully. The first one is substitute word. An example would be, a stitch in 10 saves time. Well, we all know the phrase is a stitch in 9 saves time. But if, you know, and if it's not your language, that's one of the problems. And idioms don't translate well into Japanese or other languages. But in the text, there are situations where the word has been transferred. A second one is to have like an understory underneath the text. And that is normally indicated by dates or numbers. They often point to something else, which then opens other doors. Obvious mistakes are another typical steganography trick. That would be, for example, using a lowercase letter where a capital letter should be used, or a misspelling. Missing words or missing sections from various places, that is a dead giveaway. But if you don't know the text, you wouldn't notice it. And in those days, these people had classical educations. They read Latin and Greek for breakfast when they were like kids, you know. So they know if something's missing or wrong, they know it. But we don't have that luxury. The fifth one is what they call scare quotes. Scare quotes are quotation marks around a certain word or phrase to bring it to the fore, to make you notice it. For example, she promised to be on time. You know? We say that now, you know, like that. That's a scare quote. That's in the ritual as well. And that is pointing to something to say, hey, look, you know, this means something. You know, it's not just, you know, a quotation. So there are two important things when you approach this, and I fell into this trap many times. The first is you have to think from the point of view from somebody in the 1700s. If you think with our mindset, it's not so easy. And the second thing is, as I mentioned, intelligentsia in that time, like Sir Francis Bacon, Sir Isaac Newton, they all had classical educations. If you look them up on Wikipedia, you know, somebody like Sir Francis Bacon, he spoke Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and I think he also did Italian, Spanish, you know. We don't have that. We don't have that understanding. And that is a kind of weakness. Previously, I was master of the research lodge for a few years. Nobody ever mentioned this, that this could be a puzzle or a cipher inside a cipher. And that is actually, once you start thinking in that term and start looking for it, things start appearing. So if the signposts are so well hidden, how do we go about finding them? That's an obvious question. So you've got to look for this key. And the key actually is so obvious, it's hidden in plain sight. It's one of those, you just gloss over it, because we've all heard it so many times. It doesn't, you know, but, you know, when I found the key when I first became Master Mason, and the reason is because I did Latin at school. And when I saw that, I thought, what? This must be a misprint. How could it be a misprint? Why didn't they correct it? You know? Well, no, it's not a misprint. It's there to be a key for people to say, oh, there's something strange about this. Let's look around the text. Let's look behind the text. But it did take me about 30 years to understand what the meaning of the key was. I found it, but I didn't realize that it opened lots of doors. So what do the keys lead to? That's the really important thing. The keys lead to three very famous alchemical texts. And the first one, which is kind of cute, but it's called The 12 Keys by Basil Valentine. It was written in 1599 in German and then translated in 1618 by Michael Meyer into Latin. Because it's in Latin, people could read it. English people didn't bother to learn German. It wasn't a language we bothered to learn. The second book is the Book of Lambspring, written in 1625. And the third one is the Mutus Liber, the most famous of all of them, written in 1677. So all these three books came in the 17th century, within about 50 years before Freemasonry started. Now, these three books are unique because they have very little words. Mutus Liber has only like 3 lines, but it's 16 pages long. They're just pictures. The Book of Lambspring is really strange. And so what has it got to do with us? These keys all point in that direction because Freemasonry, combined with those pictures, actually teach you a new lesson. What you're learning from the keys and what you learn by understanding the story behind the story actually brings those 3 books alive. Because there's no description in the books. They're just pictures. And we look at them and say, oh, yeah, it's a furnace. You know, what are they doing? Stoking a furnace. The answer is in this lodge. That's where it's interesting. I was so surprised. So I kind of think that the combination of those 3 alchemical tests and Freemasonry as we know it actually combine to make the philosopher's stone, which is the holy grail of alchemy. But we have to understand the ritual, find it, interpret it, which will then lead you to something else. So really this is a riddle inside an enigma, inside a whatever. So I'm just about to stop here because it's late, but if you find something you think is a clue or a signpost, please ask me, send me an email, and I can tell you if it's one of the 22 I know, I will let you know. I don't believe in telling people, this is the answer. You're on a journey, and it's not a destination, it's the journey that's important in Freemasonry. But I will start you off with one, just to get you going, and I've mentioned it recently, but there's a quotation from Shakespeare in the ritual. Why? What is it? Why? And what's it pointing to? I think I'll leave it here because it's been a long night. Thank you very much.